Right, so we've done the header, and the next thing that we can actually start looking at is the countries list or the homepage if you like. One thing that we're going to do though, we're going to ignore the search and the filter components for now, and just going to focus on the list of countries. Once we're happy with that, then we could add the search and the filter components. Right, so we are back in VS Code and we're going to use the Angular CLI to create our first component. That will be used for showing the countries, and of course we will then have other components that will probably show the card and the details, but the first thing we're going to do is to create the country list. So what we're going to do, as we did before, ng G or generate, then C for component. We want to put this in countries folder, and the component is going to be called country list. And of course we could pass the -d flag just to make sure we're doing the right thing, but I think we could just leave it for now and create it straight away. Right, so we have our countries folder, and if we look at that, we should be able to see the country list. There you go. So we have the country list component, and yeah, I think that's a great start. The next thing we're going to do is, of course, look at the API that we're going to use and hopefully create a service to get some data. So if we look at the REST countries API, one of the great things about this, we don't actually need any keys for this, so I think that's quite straightforward. And just looking at the endpoints here, so for the home page we need to get all countries, so it looks like we could use this endpoint. You could also, when we look at search, we can also search by country name, the country code, and we can also filter by the region, which I think is really useful. So that's going to be our base URL. If you look at this, without the or, I think that could be our base URL. So we can copy it and hopefully start using it soon. So we're back in VS Code, and I'm going to create a shared folder, and within this shared folder I am going to create the service to get it data. So we could possibly call it data service or country service. So I'll go in here and I'll just add a folder called shared. I could actually do that. I didn't have to add it here. I could have used a CLI to create it, but it's fine. So within this folder, we're going to create the service. And again, we could use the CLI to do that. So ng generate or G, S or service if you don't want to use the alias. And here we want to put that in countries, and in countries we have a shared folder. And what do we want to call this service? We can call it country service, or actually, seeing this is the only service that we're going to have, I can call it data service. I know it's not the best name, but you could also call it country service, just to make everyone happy. Country service. Nah, just data service. -d. If you want to look at it before you create it, or just create it straight away. Right, so we have our service, data service created for us by the CLI. If we look at the shared folder, you should be able to see the service here, which is great. So we have the injectable we have the injectable decorator. So here this is provided in root. If you're not, again, unless you used one of the old versions of Angular, you don't need to worry about this at all. So actually not going to spend any time on that. So we have a constructor. We're going to inject the HTTP client, but before we could do that, we need to actually import that module. So we are going to go into the app module and import the HTTP client module, if I can say it. Right, so we want to import the HTTP client module. Oh, the license is not helping. So the HTTP client module. And yeah, so now we should be able to inject the HTTP client into the constructor of our service. Right, so in our service, we're going to inject an instance of the HTTP client. We're going to name that HTTP and the import is here, which is good. So that's the HTTP client. And now we can start making some HTTP calls, which is great. Right, so what we can do, I copied the base URL for the REST countries API. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that in the environment .ts file. So here, this is, again, as you can see, the production flag is set to false. So that means this is for development. So we can actually put a base URL here. And if you end up deploying this application, you need to make sure that you put that in the production environment as well, which of course is this. So we could put it in two places just to make sure that we always have it, just to be sure. But if you're not going to deploy it, then it doesn't really matter. So just we put a base URL here to shorten the URL in the service. That's all we've done. If you don't want to use the environment variables, then you can create a property here. You can create a private property here and use it in your service. There's nothing wrong with that. Right, so we are going to create our first method for getting countries, and we could call that method get all countries. And what is this going to return? It's going to return an observable. We don't know the type yet, so we could say just give us any for now. Don't shoot me yet. But because I'm not going to leave it as any. And of course we're going to return this .http.get. We're going to pass the URL, which we don't have yet. So here I'm just going to create a const URL, and I'm using a backticks here, so I can pass in the base URL from the environment variable. The environment variables that we set up, and if there's any strings, I can actually append the strings as well. So we use the $ curly braces, and we are looking for the environment. Which one are we going to import? This one. That is the one we want because that's dev. If you look at the next one, you can see it has the environment.prod, so that's production. It doesn't really matter because I don't think we have anything sensitive there, and we're looking for the base URL. And if I'll show you in a second, but to get the all countries from the REST API, this is the endpoint that we're looking for. We're looking for all. So it's /all, and that should give us all the countries. And I think that's about right. We can have a quick look at it just to make sure. Right, so just look at this. I think I've got it right. So we're good for now. Good for now. So that is our first method to get countries, which is great.